Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out their website, fullpresscoverage.com, for this podcast, a bunch of other great podcasts, and a ton of articles. The NFL draft coming up tomorrow, so make sure you check out the website for all sorts of great NFL draft coverage. What will the Patriots do? Your guess is as good as mine, but we're not here to talk about football. We are here to talk about basketball. And Sap, unfortunately, I have the terrible duty of talking about another awful Celtics loss. It seems like I'm a mortician. I feel like, I'm burying the Celtics every single time I talk about them, but they're doing it to themselves. It's not my fault that they're playing like crap. And this is a season where they've just continued to pile up terrible losses. And yesterday perhaps was their worst loss of the season, Sap, as they lose to the Thunder 119-115, and the Thunder are coming off a 14-game losing streak and playing on the second night of a back-to-back, and in Boston. They're in Boston. It's not like the game was in Oklahoma City. All those things to the Celtics' advantage, and the Celtics lose the game. I pinned this to my Twitter a couple months ago, Sap. There is no rock bottom for this Celtics season. I feel extremely validated because the Celtics continue to set new rock bottom after new rock bottom.
This was the low point of the season, Jet. You're losing to a team, as you said, 14-game losing streak, back-to-back games. The second night of back-to-back games, Oklahoma City's lost by an average of 31 points this year, which doesn't even seem real. You look at that roster, they're tanking. The players don't tank, but the organization tanks. It was just like, who is this guy? I've never heard of this guy. And
Right.
yet they beat the Celtics, who were somewhat undermanned. I get it. But you know what? The top teams in the league are always undermanned. I mean, Brooklyn has only played 7 games this year with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. The Lakers have had to go the last month and a half, 2 months without Anthony Davis and LeBron James. You have to make best of the situation. And the Celtics didn't do that. I mean, Jaylen Brown had a nice game, but the rest of the roster was god-awful. Marcus Smart was 4 of 17 from the floor, got a technical, had no rebounds in the game, and then we find out just before we recorded this podcast that he's been suspended for 1 game for making threatening remarks to an official. Not good. And even Kendrick Perkins came out and knocked Marcus Smart for, not being a leader on this team. And I think Kendrick Perkins is dead on. He's really the only guy on NBC Sports Boston who tells it like it is. Everybody else is kind of like, balloons, ice cream, and lollipops, that everything is great in Celtic Nation. So very frustrating. Again, they're tied for 6th in the Eastern Conference. You want to avoid the play-in, but does it really even matter? If they're in the play-in, I don't know if they're going to be able to beat any team that looks to be more motivated than them, whether it's Charlotte or whoever else. And if they're playing Miami in the first round or whoever, I don't see them doing anything in the postseason because this is who they are, Jet. They're a 500 team at best.
Yeah, it's it does seem like it's all an effort of futility at this point, regardless of where they end up, that they're going to lose in the first round. I've had that for basically since after the first month of the season. I feel like that's where I've been predicting their ultimate demise will come. And you make a good point about that players don't tank, but the Thunder's roster has been assembled in a way to maximize the amount of games they lose. The pieces they put together is intentionally to try to get them to lose.
Right.
So the Celtics couldn't even beat that team. And you're right also that, NBC Sports Boston, a lot of local coverage is still pretty glowing of the Celtics. Be like, instead of the headline being like Celtics lose to a team coming off a 14-game losing streak, it's Jaylen Brown puts up 39 as Celtics almost win the game at the last second. Like, that's not real. I mean, yeah, I guess technically that did happen, but the headline is Celtics lose to one of the, if not the worst team in the league at home. So it doesn't matter. Jason Tatum's not there. Kemba Walker is not there. Robert Williams not there. Still, you should beat a team that's been, again, assembled with the idea to try to lose as many games as possible and has been succeeding in doing that. So absolutely no excuse. The players, the Celtics, that win streak that they had and that nice West Coast trip appears to be just a complete mirage, and that this is much more close to what they are than what they did on that West Coast swing, which is beat good teams. The Celtics, you cannot look at a single game left on their schedule and say, I feel good about this one in terms of they're going to get a win, because they've shown that on any given night, they can lose to any given team.
Yeah, and they can beat some of the good teams, although not as often as you would hope. They have the easiest schedule remaining in the final month of the season. Does that even matter? I mean, they just lost to what I think is the worst roster in the NBA team that's tanking. They were at home, the Celtics. OKC had played the previous night on the road. You were coming off a real embarrassing loss in Charlotte 2 days earlier, so you had a little time to stew about that and maybe come out with a better effort than they did. And right from the get-go, OKC was right in that game. It's not like the Celtics built this
wire
big
to wire.
They actually, the Celtics were down, came back, and then gave it back. And here's the crazy thing about that game. OKC committed 27 turnovers. I mean, a team that bad committing 27 turnovers found a way to win. This would be like the New York Jets, turning the ball over 4 times in a game against your team and finding a way to win. I mean, the numbers just didn't add up. Just another frustrating night if you're a Celtics fan. And this is something that's continued all season long. And where it leads, who the hell knows? If Danny Ainge, keeps this group together, including the head coach, and comes back next year, well, then he's really not doing anything. And again, I think this is more to blame on his part because he's the one who put this roster together. The coaching staff deserves a lot of blame as well because they apparently can't motivate this group. And the players deserve a lot of blame as well because you got to bring it from night to night, and they just don't do that. And, Mike Gorman, who was on with Toucher and Rich earlier in the day, talked about that they really don't have a leader, and they don't. I mean, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are all-star caliber players, but neither one's really a leader. Kemba Walker, they thought would be a leader. I don't know what he's ever led anybody to before other than the University of Connecticut to the national championship, and that doesn't count when we're talking about the NBA. We have a big difference on the value of Marcus Smart. He's your favorite player. You love him. I think he's way overvalued. He's missing the next game because he got suspended one game by the league for, barking whatever at officials, and he got a technical. He was 4 of 17 in that game. I think he's way too much work for what he offers you. So they have to make moves in the offseason, and it may include Brad Stevens going. I know he has 6 years left on his contract, but you know what? This is a franchise worth $2.5-3 billion. If they have to eat that and make a move, so be it.
Yeah, and it really, like you said, it should be Danny Ainge going as well, because he's the one who's put the team in this position in terms of having such little talent outside of really your top 2 guys. And yeah, I still love Marcus Smart, and he's still my favorite player. But I think when you have a rudderless team and when you have a leaderless team, and he can just sort of run wild and do whatever he wants, then it's just a nightmare. And if you can't get the good Marcus Smart and you're only getting the bad Marcus Smart, then he's negatively impacting the team. Unless you have somebody to, rein him in, like, kind of like Isaiah Thomas, I think, was able to do at times, then you're just not, or Al Horford, maybe you're just not going to be able to maximize what he brings to a team. And this team is just rudderless and directionless and has a devoid of leadership. And so Marcus Smart isn't giving you the things that he's capable of from a good perspective. You're just getting the bad stuff, the poor shooting, the technicals for no reason, the getting suspended. It's not good. And the Celtics need a complete overhaul in my mind. And I'm glad Mike Gorman, who's, technically not worked for the team, but, he's worked for whatever affiliate is calling their games for 30 years. I'm glad that he's at least stepping up and saying something is going wrong and saying that Tatum and Brown aren't capable of being the leaders of this team. And that, that makes sense, right? Why should young guys or guys who haven't won anything be the leaders of a team? You can't expect them to. Typically, the guys who are leaders of a team are guys who are veteran guys who have won something before. And no one on this team has won anything. With the exception of Tristan Thompson. And, when your 7th or 8th best player is that guy, then he can't really be the leader either. So it's a poorly constructed roster. It's a team that has players either not listening to the coach, which is really bad, or the coach isn't preaching the right things, which is equally bad. And that's resulted in really bad loss after really bad loss happened. I mean, they've lost games to now the Thunder. They lost a couple games to the Pistons. They've lost to the dregs of the league. They've lost to the Kings. You know, it's not like these games are few and far between. They consistently lose to bad teams. They lost to the Bulls the other week without Zach LaVine. So there's no excuses. They are not a well-constructed team. They're not playing hard. They're not listening to the coach, or the coach is not saying the right things, possibly both. It's a complete mess, and the Celtics fans and a team that has so much history deserve better. And you can't tell me that going into next season with a similar looking roster and the same coaching staff is anything less than a slap in the face of the fans and a dereliction of duty, and not caring about your job and not caring about the direction this team is going in. So if the owners aren't woken up by this disaster of a season and that type of loss to a team that's intentionally trying to lose games, then I don't know what could possibly wake them up from their fever dream of being in love with Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens, because this is a nightmare. And the season has just been like torture, Sap. It really has been, for a Celtics fan like myself, a diehard Celtics fan, it's been torturous.
They need a full colonoscopy. How's that sound?
Yeah. They need an exorcism, actually, is what they might need too.
That too. Yeah.
I'm at the point, Sap, where, I want all these guys to succeed. And, I like Marcus Smart and I really like Tatum and Brown, but you can't go into the offseason and say, hey, we are definitely, no question, keeping this guy. Everybody needs to be on the table. Every plan needs to be on the table, as long as it's not run it back. I don't care what they do, as long as it's not run it back. If they want to go in the direction of starting from scratch, that's painful, but I'd rather that than being this middling territory. If they want to make a huge move and try to really go for it and maybe sacrifice a little bit of the future for the present, I'm fine with that too. Just don't stay stagnant. That's the last thing I want them to do, and that's the worst thing they can do.
Yeah, and you'll be a mediocre team that maybe qualifies for the playoffs, gets bounced. You're not bad enough to get into the lottery, let's get a high lottery pick. And at that point, you may see Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown saying, maybe this isn't the place for us. I mean, young stars in the league, they'll sign that second contract with their original team because that's where they can make the most money. Then after that, they can turn around and say, I want to play elsewhere. I don't see a path to a championship with this roster. So move me, whether it's Jason Tatum wanting to pair up with his good friend Bradley Beal or Jaylen Brown going somewhere. And now you've really got to start from scratch at that point. So they're not in a very good spot right now. And of the four major sports teams in the city, they're by far the least likable. I mean, the Bruins, at least made some moves at the trade deadline. They added Taylor Hall, who's really playing well for them. And I don't think the Bruins are going to win the cup, but at least they look engaged. The Red Sox have been a surprise, and the Patriots are always relevant. They spent money in free agents. And here's the Celtics, with Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens and Wick Grossbeck all, singing platitudes about their players, and then their broadcast partners, going along with it. And again, credit for Mike Gorman. To Mike Gorman, he's in his mid-70s. I don't think he needs to answer to anybody. And you know how much I love Kendrick Perkins, because he really suffers no fools and is a guy who tells it like it is. The rest of the crew over there at NBC Sports Boston, led by Brian Scalabrine, they just sound like, Baghdad Bob at some point. They're blaming the officials for every loss. It's like, get over it. Officiating in the NBA sucks. There's no conspiracy against the Celtics. Just play better.
Yeah, I mean, when you're starting Tristan Thompson and Semi Ojeleye, that's a problem. I know you have injuries, but that speaks to your depth. Semi Ojeleye is a fringe, at best, fringe NBA player, last guy off the bench, and you're starting him because you have injuries.
Yeah.
That's not depth. That's like reaching into the G League and trying to pull a guy and put him in the starting lineup. It's bad. And they only have themselves to blame for letting the roster get to this point, specifically Danny Ainge. And I think Brad Stevens has not adapted and not grown as a coach. So their mentality of everything's going to be fine, we're so great, we're the Boston Celtics, has bit them in the ass. And now they have to completely reevaluate this summer, because no matter what, the season's not going to come to a happy end. Whether they lose in the first round or get swept in the second round, it's not going to be an impressive finish. So I'm hoping that major changes happen this offseason. I'm not going to say that I think it's going to happen definitively because I just don't know what the ownership group is thinking right now. And everything they've said indicates to me that they're in love with Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge. So that scares me because I know that this is a real watershed moment for the team in terms of how they decide to approach their future is this offseason. So we'll see. I'm almost sap. I love basketball and I love the Celtics, but like I'm just like ready for the season to end. I mean, this has just been so unfun to watch.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to describe it. They have their moments, and you go, well, it looks like they're going to right the ship and become a contending team. And even their ceiling at this point, at the very best, is the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference, which means maybe you win one round, although I don't think they would beat the Knicks or Miami because those teams play better defense than they do and have a better culture right now. But if you snuck by that, then you're playing the Brooklyn Nets, you're going to get swept. I think that's a bigger kick in the nuts than not winning that first round series.
Yeah.
Maybe they go to the play-in tournament, lose out, enter the lottery and get lucky, or maybe they just end up with the 14th pick again because Danny Ainge is really good with those 14th picks. Romeo Langford and Naismith, have really availed themselves really well over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
Tongue-in-cheek.
Danny, his draft record is very spotty, and if you ask guys who work for the Celtics, they say he hits on every pick he takes. I told you I got the argument with Mark D'Amico saying that Grant Williams was a big hit at 22. Well, if a hit is a guy who's a negative value over replacement player and a negative plus minus in his career, then then what's really hitting? I mean, or what's missing? I guess at that point, if it's a hit. What's missing is somebody who's maybe scoring on your own basket, I guess. I don't know. But we'll move on from the Celtics because it's the same old story, Sap. They can't get out of their own way. They're disappointing, and it's been a miserable season. So we'll go to something that'll irritate you instead of irritate me. How's that sound?
Sounds good. It's time to be irritated.
Dr. J, who's quickly rising up my ranks as one of my favorite all-time players. A guy I've always known has been one of the 20 best players of all time, but I might put him at number 1 now because he has just taken it to your guy LeBron, leaving him off of his all-time list. He made 2 all-time starting fives. LeBron, nowhere to be found. Here's his all-time starting 5: Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell. Second team, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Karl Malone, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. No LeBron James. Here's what he said as to why no LeBron James. Quote, he was a guy who led the charge in terms of super teams being put together, citing LeBron pulling strings to assemble talent in Miami, Cleveland, and LA to win championships. He could pick his own team. I'm not going to pick his team, he said with a laugh. And thus, Dr. J has elevated himself to one of my favorite players to ever play.
Yeah, I guess Dr. J may be suffering from dementia or, amnesia because there's always been super teams in the NBA. The Celtics had a super team in the late 50s through the 60s. The 70s was one of the decade where, teams would win and then not be able to repeat. It was kind of a different type of decade. Then the 80s, you had the Celtics and the Lakers. The 90s, you had the Bulls. The 2000s, the Lakers and the Spurs. And then in the last decade, it's been LeBron James and the Golden State Warriors have dominated. So there's been super teams throughout the history of the NBA, including the ones Dr. J played on in Philadelphia. The ABA collapsed, and all of those really great players from the ABA were either sold or went to a draft into the NBA. Dr. J got sold by the Nets, who remained in the NBA during the merger. And they sold Dr. J for, I believe, $3 million to the 76ers. Then he signed a $3 million contract. So Philadelphia bought Dr. J. They also had George McGinnis, who had played in the ABA. Later, they traded George McGinnis, a Hall of Famer, for another Hall of Famer, and Bobby Jones. Dr. J played with multiple Hall of Famers, Mo Cheeks, Charles Barkley, and when the Sixers couldn't quite win a championship, they went out and stole Moses Malone from the Houston Rockets and finally broke through and won a championship. Dr. J also played with 2 other players who, if they had stayed healthy, would have been Hall of Famers, and Doug Collins and Andrew Toney. So Dr. J played with a treasure trove of great players. He really pretty comparable to what Kevin Durant has played with, and he has won championship to show for that. Now, I love Dr. J. Dr. J was the face of the league for 5 to 6 years, one of the most elegant, graceful athletes on and off the court you could ever find. But he's gone from being, Colin Powell to Louis Farrakhan in the last month, right? Where he never said anything before. He was like Russell Wilson. Dr. J said nothing, never weighed into political issues, social issues. He was like the very corporate guy. And now all of a sudden he's got all sorts of opinions, which is great. I support Dr. J having those opinions. Leaving LeBron James off is obviously his biggest oversight, but it's not that far ahead of the other oversight, which has Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson on his second all-time team. I don't know anybody who's watched basketball, whether they're a fan, an executive, or anyone in between, who doesn't have Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson as their all-time backcourt. That is like not arguable. Like, could you find a guard comparable to Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson in the history of the game? And I know people will say, well, Kobe Bryant deserves to be up there because Kobe won 5 titles. Kobe was great. He wasn't Jordan. He wasn't Magic. Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan, that's the all-time backcourt. That's not even like debatable. And Dr. J has them on the second team behind Jerry West and Oscar Robertson, who each have 1 title. I mean, Jordan has 6 and Magic has 5. And between the two of them, they have 8 MVPs. I mean, multiple scoring titles for Jordan, multiple assist titles for Magic. That to me is crazy as not having LeBron on the first team, is having Jordan and Magic on the second team. I mean, Dr. J obviously wants to go back to his childhood and pick players like Oscar Robertson and Jerry West, who are all-time greats. They're just not as great as Magic and Jordan. Sorry.
Do you think part of it might be with the second team? I'll get into the LeBron part in a second. Is that, the Bird and Magic specifically, and Kareem too, who's also in the second team, actively blocked him from winning more championships?
Wouldn't you elevate them though, and say, "Boy, God knows how many championships I could have won."
Depends how you hold the grudge. I don't know.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, Scottie Pippen said LeBron James was better than Michael Jordan, and the way I looked at it is Scottie wants to show that he was pretty valuable in winning those 6 titles in Chicago. So by diminishing Jordan a little bit, he actually elevates himself. Look, there's no way to explain not having Magic and Michael Jordan as your first team backcourt. Like Oscar Robertson was great, Jerry West was great, Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry, pick them all. They don't compare to Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson. I don't even think it's close. And then just looking at the rest of his roster, if we're going to round out a roster with 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center, he put 2 centers on his first team, Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain. So I guess he's saying Bill Russell was a power forward. Bill Russell was a center because he guarded Will Chamberlain in all those gargantuan matchups. Look, I love Elgin Baylor. Elgin Baylor is one of my favorite old players, and may he rest in peace. He just passed away a month ago. Elgin Baylor was not as good as LeBron James or or Larry Bird. He just wasn't. I mean, he's a little below those guys. Great player. I would have had him on my second team. I think also maybe Dr. J is like, I want to be more relevant, so let me say crazy shit and leave LeBron James essentially saying he's not one of the 10 greatest players of all time, and let me diminish Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson. I don't even know what his relationship is with Jordan, because before Jordan, there was Dr. J. Right. He was the face of the league. He was the most exciting player. He sold a lot of products. Maybe he resents Jordan, because Jordan is worth what? $1.7 billion, and Dr. J, who's I'm sure in good financial shape, in fact, owned Coca-Cola bottling company in Philadelphia, which employed 400 people. His business partner was none other than Bill Cosby at the time. Good move right now. In retrospect, not a good one. But maybe he just resents that Michael Jordan became Michael Jordan. And I always like the old players that look at the modern players and they're not resentful. Ted Williams was always a guy who praised the modern players, and said, wow, these guys today are just fantastic. They're doing a great job out there. And then that's, to me, someone who's very secure in himself. I just think maybe Dr. J is becoming a cranky old guy. He's 71. Or maybe he just wants to be relevant. And if you give out like the list that I'm going to give you, I have my all NBA teams 1, first team, second team, and third team, which I think make more sense. Again, it's only an opinion, but no one's going to say anything if he says, yeah, my all-time team is Magic, Jordan, Bird, LeBron, and pick one of the centers. No one's going to even make note of that. But if you throw Magic and Jordan on your second team and leave LeBron off both first and second team, now people are going to say, what's up with Dr. J?
I do find it hilarious that he put Karl Malone, one of your least favorite players, on his list too.
Where's Tim Duncan? You tell me who was better, Tim Duncan or Karl Malone?
Not close.
Please.
Not close.
No. I mean, Karl Malone's one of the most overrated players in the history of the sport. I'll go to my grave.
No, I think Karl Malone's fantastic. But yeah, Tim Duncan, all day, every day, twice on Sundays. Tim Duncan. Just a quick fact check, Sap. Karl Malone. Michael Jordan is worth $1.6 billion. You were right on the money, basically. There.
Boy.
And
yep,
Dr. J, $50 million. Nothing to sneeze at.
No, nothing to sneeze at. But if you're worth $50 million, you really resent the guy who's worth $1.6 billion. You do. You look at him and go, man, he's like 32 times richer than I am. And I wasn't 132nd the player that Jordan was, but he came along at a different time, and Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan. As much as I think LeBron James is the greatest player ever, Michael Jordan is the most impactful player the sport's ever seen. I make a case that Michael Jordan is the most impactful athlete we've seen in terms of business, right? Because the whole sport
it's him, Muhammad Ali, or Babe Ruth.
Because of him. Right, exactly. I mean,
one of those three.
In terms of social relevance, it's Jackie Robinson. I mean, Jackie Robinson, not only as an athlete, but as a human being, is one of the most influential people in the history of our country. You almost kind of put that to a different category. But in terms of impacting their sports, it's, as you said, Ali, Ruth. I'll throw Wayne Gretzky in there, even though I think Mario Lemieux is a better player. But Gretzky expanded the sport of hockey to Southern California, which it never had been. They had teams there, but no one really cared until Gretzky showed up. And obviously Michael Jordan. So maybe there's some resentment there against Michael Jordan from the real old guys, because then you get Jordan's generation that resents LeBron, right? Because we hear Barkley always knocking LeBron, and now Pippen's knocking LeBron. And by the way, all these players that talk about super teams, we do remember that Charles Barkley and Scottie Pippen went and played with Hakeem Olajuwon. Is that a super team? Albeit, those guys were past their prime. Come on, guys.
I do want to say this,
crazy.
Though, Sap. I think, will you at least concede that the super teams that the Celtics had in the 60s and the 80s, the same with the Lakers, were constructed in a different manner than the way LeBron did it? And I think that sort of...
Yeah, but what's the difference, though?
Because one's more organic than the other.
The players are empowered. Good for them. I hate that discussion because... Okay, so they have a general manager, these teams. LeBron spent 7 years in Cleveland. I think at some point realized, I'm never going to win here because the owner is a basket case, and I can't find a general manager, and they change coaches like I change underwear. It's like, let me get the hell out of here. And then he teams up with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, and then after that, he goes back to Cleveland. And then after 4 more years of can you get me some players here? You traded Kyrie Irving for nothing. Kevin Love's always hurt. My best player in one of the finals, my best teammate was Matthew Dellavedova. Another one, it was Jeff Green. If you are employed by someone and have the ability to go somewhere else to do your job better and be more successful, we never knock anybody for doing that. So they now have players have more freedom than they've ever had because of LeBron James. As I've said a million times, Jet, Michael Jordan made this sport global. LeBron James made it mobile. And Steph Curry's made it inspirational because so many young players now think that they can be the next Steph Curry, although we may never see another Steph Curry again. But there's a pushback on that. But, the Celtics went out and traded for Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. I mean,
because they sucked for years and they acquired assets. The assets didn't turn out to be particularly good, but at least they had a plan and they executed the plan.
Yeah, they had a friend of theirs as the general manager of the Minnesota Timberwolves.
I maintain that was still the best offer that they got. I don't think that they got any particularly...
Don't you think the Lakers would have offered better than the Celtics?
The Lakers are offering Andrew Bynum, who ended up having a worse career than Al Jefferson. So,
But at the time, Bynum was considered the better player, the better prospect, right?
Yeah, but they just had Bynum in the Celtics offer. Gerald Green was also considered a high level prospect, and they had the pick that they were offering too. It didn't work out. Listen, the Timberwolves got a bag of balls, but ultimately, I pushed back on the fact that it was just Kevin McHale. If somebody had offered them something that was significantly better, I'm sure they would have taken it.
I don't know about that, but
I just think the Celtics had a plan that went over a long period of time, and they organically made the thing happen.
Okay,
LeBron just kept choosing what the best opportunity for him was.
Well, great. That's what you do in the United States of America. You know, if you're working at WEEI,
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but
and you get the opportunity to work at the sports hub, you go there. So I'm
saying he made it easier on himself. If he had just stayed in Cleveland the whole time, Sap, and won a championship there. Just like the championship he won, it would be weighted a lot more than the championships he won in Miami. I don't think anybody considers those that impressive.
Well, okay, the ones in Miami, what did they win after he left? Absolutely nothing. I mean, Dwayne Wade was, I think, a little past his prime.
Because he left at the time where he knew that they couldn't carry him anymore, so he jumped to the team with the younger player.
That they couldn't carry him, or he carried them? I don't think they ever carried him.
They couldn't. I'm saying they couldn't. They weren't good enough to continue to win, so he left to go to an opportunity that was better for him.
Okay, Los Angeles, is that a super team that they went and traded for Anthony Davis? What's the difference between the Lakers
they're not
trading
a super
for Anthony
team.
Davis? Okay, but they won a championship, so we got to give them credit for that one.
I do give them credit for that one. I will say, though, that it was a rigged game in the way that Anthony Davis forced himself to just one team. There was no other team that had an opportunity of acquiring him.
And if he had done that to go to the Celtics, you would have approved that.
No, I would have said that he did the same thing. He rigged it to go to the Celtics, but LeBron has done it in multiple locations, and the Celtics haven't really done that before. No one's forcing a trade to the Celtics, Sep.
Yeah, no, well, that's partly because it's maybe not an appealing place to go. Miami and Los Angeles are appealing places to go.
Right, it goes to that frustration aspect I talked about the other week on the podcast where LA did everything wrong and they still won a championship because they're LA. So it frustrates me. The Celtics have to, and most teams in the NBA have to build organically. The Lakers don't. The Heat don't.
Well, the Heat did build organically when they won their first title.
They did, but I'm saying they don't have to build organically.
They also haven't won a title since LeBron left. I get they got to the finals last year. But I push back on all that because it's always been rigged. There's always been a handful of teams that dominate, and players that are veterans that are ring chasing go to those teams. And everybody was pushing back that Brooklyn had added LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin, and now Andre Drummond's with the Lakers, and et cetera. But that's always been the case. You know, when Bob McAdoo went to the Lakers, he'd been an MVP, but he was at the end of his career, he wanted to win a championship. He goes to the Lakers. Bill Walton goes to the Celtics. I mean, the Celtics in the 60s constantly added veteran players ring chasing, whether they be a backup center or backup forward or whatever the case may be. They looked and said, my best chance to win a championship is to get together with Bill Russell. So it's been going on for years. Just now the players have more empowerment, which I like, because I'm always on the side of players. And you know what? If the players are better executives than these general managers who can't get out of their own way, so be it. So I think you and Dr. J need to, chill a little bit.
No, I like Dr. J. He's a very reputable doctor. He's one of the brightest in his field.
I think Dr. J is, committing malpractice as we speak.
Do you know how he got that nickname? I don't know the story off the top of my head.
He operated on the court or operated on the boards. When he went to UMass out of high school, he was about 6'4". He grew to 6'6". He actually at UMass averaged, I believe, close to 30 points per game and 20 rebounds. He could rebound, Dr. J. Dr. J was a great player. Like, people just say, well, he was so exciting. He went to the basket. He had enormous hands, so the ball never would get out of his hands. He was just a sensational player, but he was a damn good defensive player, underrated passer, good rebounder, and then going to the basket, he was as creative as any player who's ever seen. But it was Dr. J, Julius Erving. He's going to operate on the boards or on the court. So that's the way he got that nickname.
His nickname should have been the Surgeon.
That's not as good as Dr. J.
No, it's not, but surgeons are the ones who operate, right? Doctor's not operating.
Well, I don't know what kind of doctor he was.
Well, I guess you are a doctor if you're a surgeon.
True. All surgeons are doctors. Yes. I would hope so. Especially
not all
going
doctors
into
are
surgery. True. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you get, then you've got the doctors, the PhDs of literature, which hopefully aren't, doing surgery. Can I give you my all-time team and just see what you think? First team, and again, I'm going to put one center on each team. So I don't put two centers on one team because that's not how we're doing it. First team would be Jordan, Magic, LeBron, Bird, and Russell. That'd be my first team. My second team in the backcourt would be Kobe and Oscar Robertson. I'd have Tim Duncan and Elgin Baylor as my forwards, and at center I'd have Kareem. I went with a third team. I'd have Kevin Durant, who I have elevated to the 16th greatest player ever. Charles Barkley would be my other forward, and I know people will say, well, Karl Malone had a better career than Charles Barkley. I disagree with that. Neither won a championship, but I would take Barkley over Karl Malone. My guards would be Jerry West and Steph Curry, and my center would be Wilt. Those are my top. Those aren't necessarily my top 15 players because I have some centers in there like Moses Malone, Hakeem, and Shaq.
Was yesterday the day you decided to get rid of Dr. J from that third team?
No. I think Charles Barkley was better than Dr. J.
Okay.
No, I do. He'd be on my fourth team if you want to go that far. And probably with Karl Malone, I guess, as the two forwards. They get his wish. He can play with Karl Malone. He
does love Karl Malone.
He loves Karl Malone for some reason. Maybe, you got a doctor, you got a mailman, and you go from there. But Dr. J played with all these great players. I mean, George McGinnis, Hall of Famer, traded for another Hall of Famer in Bobby Jones. You had freaking Moses Malone when Moses Malone was the best player in basketball, the most dominant player in basketball. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar hated playing against Moses Malone. You had Charles Barkley late in your career. You had Mo Cheeks throughout your career, a Hall of Famer. And then Doug Collins and Andrew Toney, two guys that probably would have went to the Hall of Fame if they had remained healthy. Dr. J was loaded with talent as his teammates.
Yeah,
but he couldn't.
The league wasn't this talented. It was more concentrated on certain teams. I get that.
There were four teams that knew what the hell they were doing. Philly, Boston, the Lakers, somewhat the Milwaukee Bucks, and San Antonio had some decent runs. If you think there's poorly run teams now, Houston. The league was just loaded with them. Yeah, there were a lot of Houston Rockets, and I don't think OKC is poorly run. They've got a plan there with their 37 first-round picks over the next 7 years or however many they have.
No, they're well run. I really like Sam Presti. I hope the Celtics hire him and fire Danny Ainge.
The way you snuck that in there.
Those are solid. Those are solid teams, Sap. Hard to argue with, with any of those players. The one thing I'll say is that I think that LeBron. Look, Dr. J looks at himself as Mr. 76er. You can look at Magic as Mr. Laker, Larry as Mr. Celtic, and LeBron's kind of ruined that. There's no more Mr. whatever team. It's just not going to happen anymore. Steph Curry maybe will end up being Mr. Warrior, and even hear rumors about him leaving. So I think that there is some frustration from a basketball fan standpoint too. If you want guys to stay for your team the whole time, and now there was never loyalty on the aspect of the team to the players, and now it's vice versa. There's no loyalty from the aspect of the players to the team. So it's fair. I'm not saying it's unfair, but it does kind of suck that LeBron isn't going to be remembered for playing with any particular team. He's going to be remembered for just being really good at basketball.
I think when he retires, if they do this in basketball, I'm not even sure of that. I know in baseball you wear a cap. Okay. I would think he's a Cleveland Cavalier because he's going to play 11 years in Cleveland. Which will be roughly half his career. 4 years in Miami, maybe plays 5 years with the Lakers. I wrote a column a couple months ago. He's going to end up with the Celtics and teach them how to win.
But you you think 40. Magic Johnson, Lakers.
Right.
Larry Bird, Celtics, LeBron.
Yeah.
You're like, the traveling circus is what LeBron is.
All right, well, Jordan went to a second team.
At the end of his career.
Okay, well,
for
then
2 years.
He shouldn't have done it then. He shouldn't have done it then. He retired.
I think he regrets
twice.
it. I don't think he was happy about how his career ended.
He was looking to buy into the team. It didn't work out, and then eventually bought Charlotte. So, yeah, other sports. Tom Brady left the Patriots and won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. So Wayne Gretzky who most people think is the greatest hockey player ever. I don't. I think it's Mario Lemieux. Wayne Gretzky played with multiple teams. I mean, he Edmonton, then they couldn't afford him. He went to the LA Kings. He went to the Rangers, St. Louis. He went to 4 teams. It's
Yeah, but you and I both know, Sap, that basketball, it's not, hockey is the 4th on that totem pole. And basketball.
Oh, I get it, but Wayne Gretzky's at the highest level of any athlete.
Yeah, he is,
I mean,
but no one cares
forgotten.
that much compared to what LeBron's doing.
Well, maybe they do in Canada.
Yeah, in Canada
LeBron
they do.
LeBron's very polarizing. I know that. He's a lightning rod. I'll go through my thesaurus and find other words to describe that. But yeah, I think people should just get over this notion that guys go play with other teams. And look, it's kind of bitten him in the ass because Kevin Durant has done it and seems to be doing a better job of it. I mean, well, Durant went to an established team in Golden State, and then he paired up with Kyrie, and they got James Harden, and now he's got another super team. It's almost like Durant does it in a very blasé, passive way, where LeBron's more aggressive in doing it. But in the end, they both build super teams.
Yeah,
just a little bit differently how they do it.
The two most reviled players in the NBA right now. I mean, LeBron's also the most popular player in the NBA, right, and Kevin Durant might be the second most popular, but they're also equally reviled. Yep. So that's how it goes. All right, so we both had subjects that ticked us off today, Sap. That's good. That's how it should be. We're going to be back tomorrow with another podcast talking about the play-in tournament, looking like it's going to be here to stay. Going to compare 2 future Hall of Famers, see which one you would rather prefer. I know Sap and I are going to disagree on this. I can already tell. But make sure to check that out you can see our podcast, the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, on Full Press Coverage, our presenting partner. And you can also find us on iTunes. Make sure to rate us and leave a comment if you can. Rate us 5 stars. Find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Jet Stryer for the visual presentation. Until tomorrow, I am Jet Stryer. That is John Sapichetti. We are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. See you, everybody.